Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. We're just going to give it a minute or two while we're waiting for others to join. In the meantime, if you could please introduce yourself on the chat. Just your name and your ESO. That would be useful. And we'll just give it another minute or two and then we'll start. Okay, please introduce yourself on the chat. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Vienna. Thank you, John. Okay, I think we should get started now. We don't have a lot of time, so those that are coming in, please introduce yourself on the chat. Please feel free to make any comments or questions on the chat as well. My name is Precious Mahove, to those who don't know me yet. And thank you so much for joining us on our very first module. Today we'll be covering the monitoring and evaluation module. And please remember to engage on the chat. I'll introduce our speaker today. We are joined by Tarisai Nyamandwe, who will facilitate the session. Tarisai has over 15 years of working in enterprise development. She's worked in mining, she's worked in agribusiness, in private equity, renewable energy, in trade, and in investment. She specializes in data analysis, in visualization, in business analysis. She oversees robust monitoring and evaluation projects. She has worked for the EU and she has worked for USAID as well. Tarisai holds an MBA and also she has an honors degree in economics. So over to you, Tarisai.
Thank you so much, Precious, and morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this monitoring, evaluation, and learning session. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Okay. Precious, just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So monitoring, evaluation, and learning, this is a function of a program or a project that involves systematically collecting, analyzing, and presenting data so that, one, we are able to tell the story of change, and also just to assess and ascertain the progress as well as effectiveness, and also see if there's any impact that we can derive from the interventions that we'll be implementing for the program or for the project. So in today's session, we're going to cover three key areas. how to develop monitoring, evaluation, and learning frameworks, data collection and analysis, as well as learning and improvement. So to kickstart, monitoring and evaluation frameworks. So remember when I initially gave my definition of what MEL is, I used the word systematically, right? So now, just following on in the same stride, the monitoring and evaluation framework involves us designing a structured approach on how we are going to assess the impact as well as effectiveness of the various programs or the project that we are implementing. Okay. So first things first, obviously, once we have our program, for us to design the framework now, we need to define what the objectives and the goals of this I'm going to use the word project, but obviously it's project or program. So we need to define the objectives and the goals. So we need to clearly articulate what is the purpose, what are we trying to achieve, right? What are the intended outcomes of this project? So basically, in another term that's often used to summarize the defining of the objectives and the goals is theory of change. So basically, we give a description of how and why activities are supposed to lead to certain outcomes over a period of time. So in the theory of change, you could actually just define your intended outcomes in terms of short, medium, and long term. So once you are done defining this, the purpose of why you're implementing this project, and you've set out your goals and your intended outcomes, we move on to develop indicators. I have put indicators in bold because if you remember on the agenda, we'll take a deep dive in the next couple of slides in terms of developing the indicators. But in a nutshell, the indicators, the metrics that can be measured numerically or that can be measured from a qualitative perspective. So numerically, we are talking about quantitative indicators. For example, if we look at this training that we are having today, we'll obviously take note of the number of participants who are engaged in this training. So that's an example of a quantitative indicator that you can use to then ascertain the effectiveness, say, of this training. Then another type of indicator that you can use is the qualitative. So the qualitative is basically an indicator that will give you descriptive insights. For example, post this training, you obviously get a survey or a questionnaire just to ask you, how do you feel about the training, right? And you might be asked that, would you want to give us, right, in 2 sentences or so, what feedback you'd give to us in terms of what you learned from this training. So that's an example of a qualitative indicator where you are giving us insights into how satisfied or dissatisfied you will be in this training, right? So if we are to take an example, say from a business sense, right? So say from an IT perspective, this could be a satisfaction survey to say if you have an app that you're launching or an app that's part of your program, then you could ask the users, the end users, to say, how user friendly is this? So this will give you some sort of descriptive insight into the usability of the app that will be used on your project or your program. So that's indicators. Then we move on to the next step in developing our framework, which is we then need to design the data collection methods. I don't know whether we are all on the same page. If anyone has a question or a comment. Okay, nothing is yet. So the next step will then be, okay, thank you. The next step will then be to design your data collection methods. So number one, this includes where are you going to get this data from? So are you going to use surveys? Are you going to do this via interviews? Or are you going to have focus groups? You can also have observations as a way of collecting data. Or are you going to use any documents or records as a data source? Then we also look at what tools that you're going to use for data collection. So an example of a tool can be a questionnaire, or you can have an interview guide, right? Then under your data collection methods, you also then need to decide on how frequent you will be collecting this data. Are you going to do this monthly, quarterly, or annually? So the frequency is also aligned to whatever indicators that you would have decided in step 2 above. So for some indicators, it will be ideal to collect them quarterly. Others, if they're survey indicators, for example, it would be ideal to perhaps do that annually and then monthly. So if you're going to have an indicator like revenue or sales, you might want to collect this monthly. Jobs as an indicator, you might want to consider doing this on a quarterly basis, because maybe month on month might not give you enough data points for you to be able to derive any conclusions for that, right? Then we move on to our fourth point, which is establishing baselines. So a baseline basically is your starting point. So before your intervention, say you're looking at a small business and you want to track an indicator like revenue generated. So before your intervention, what is the revenue? So that will be your baseline. That's your starting point, right? So that when you then implement your intervention, your project, or your program, then you'll be able to see the difference, or what you can attribute in terms of results from your intervention. So you know that, say, initially your starting point as revenue was 100,000 rands. At the end of the quarter, after you've started your project or your intervention, then say the revenue is now at 150. Then you can then say, because of your intervention, the 50,000 can be attributable to your intervention. Then step number 5 is development of a data management plan. So basically, this is just how are you going to store your data? Where are you going to store this? There are issues around data privacy and security. If you're going to collect any personal information, you need to ensure that it is within the laws of the jurisdiction where you're operating from, so that you still maintain the relevant privacy laws and ethical standards, right? Then we come to the 6th point on creating a reporting system. You then also need to decide how often your reports will be generated. Is it monthly, quarterly, annually, weekly, whichever suits you? And then the reporting format as well. So for the remote reporting format, this includes if you're able to then just have a rough idea or draft templates on how you're going to present this data. But also bear in mind that depending on the various donors or clients or stakeholders that you're interacting with, some will prefer reports in a certain format, right? Then point number 7 is then you need to set up your evaluation strategies, right? So there's formative evaluation. This is where you conduct evaluations during the implementation of the project in order to improve your processes and outcomes. Remember, this is not cast in stone. It's your framework is a dynamic document or a dynamic process where you can always pause, reflect, and adjust, right? Then you can also have an evaluation right at the end of the program, which is, I guess the scientific term is summative evaluation, where you're then assessing the overall success of the project at its conclusion. And then you're able to assess and determine whether the objectives that you set in step 1 above have been achieved. Let me emphasize that the formative evaluation is very important, because as you're implementing, you can then stop and pause. Are you on target to achieve the set objectives and goals? What is it that you need to adjust and amend as you're going through? And then we integrate this into the next step, which is learning. I've also put that in bold because I think in one of the slides we'll take a deep dive into learning and how to incorporate that in our monitoring, evaluation, and learning process. Then we also need to allocate resources for MEL. Just like any key function in a business, you need to allocate resources, both financial and non-financial resources, because MEL activities include data collection. Whether you determine that you're going to do this via survey, you're going to do surveys, you're going to do observations, because remember the data needs to be verified also. So you need to allocate resources for this. And then in terms of the staffing as well, you assign your roles and responsibilities on who does what in MEL, because this is a critical function in your project implementation. Then, like I said, that this is not, your framework is not cast in stone. It's obviously a document that needs to be constantly adjusted as you go. So you obviously then review and revise to ensure that there's continuous improvement. Where necessary, you make adjustments so that by the end of your project term, you will achieve your set objectives and goals. Okay. Then moving on to the next session, if there are no questions, we move on to defining the performance indicators, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, there's KPIs, the short for performance indicators. This is what we then use to measure the impact of the project that you're implementing. So we use these as ways of tracking our success towards achieving these objectives and goals. So the first thing is we need to ensure that whatever KPIs that we have, we've aligned them to the objective or the goal, which is the purpose of why we are implementing this project. And obviously, they need to be specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant and time bound. So obviously, if your project, say it's a 2-year, 3-year program, we need to ensure that these KPIs are also aligned to these timelines. And we need to identify and also note down both the quantitative and the qualitative ones, because you can't have only quantitative metrics to track, because you then need to have the underlying story behind these numbers in order to ensure that when you're reporting, you're giving your full story of change. Then we determine how we're going to collect the data and the sources. And most importantly, we need to set targets. We need to be working towards something. So, say we are implementing a project, right? And one of our key, let's take 2 examples. So, 2 of our key metrics that we're tracking is number of new jobs created and then revenue generated. So the first metric I gave was new jobs created, because obviously so that means our baseline is the number of jobs that we had when we started the program. Say the number of jobs that we had when we started the program was 5, right? And then over the 2-year period, given the various intervention in terms of mentorship, or if you're going to get a grant or training, capacity building, we intend to increase the number of jobs in our project from 5 to, let's say, 11. Right? So our target over the 2-year period is 11. And then in terms of revenue, if we say based on our intervention, the revenue is also going to grow by 50%. Say our starting point was 50,000 rand as our revenue, then we need to increase that to about 75,000. So our target will then be 75,000. So throughout the implementation of the project, we'll then be tracking the strides we are making towards achieving these set targets. Okay. Then we then establish how often we're going to report on these key performance indicators. And like I mentioned before, we then assign our responsibilities for who is going to collect what. Then we obviously review and adjust. The review and adjust here, if I'm still to take the 2 examples we gave, let's take revenue. If there are shocks or anything happens within the operating environment, For example, you might be affected either by exchange rate fluctuation, you might be affected by inflation. Obviously, these warrant us to go revisit our revenue targets, right? If there's anything that happens within, say, if it's a production company, if there is, say, load shedding, or previously what was happening with the delays at the ports, if that directly affects your operations, such shocks within the operating environment warrant us to revisit these targets. Obviously, when you make any adjustments on the targets, you obviously need to create a paper trail and document as to why this is being adjusted. So that at the end, when we are doing that summative evaluation that I mentioned, we obviously put all these factors into consideration and include that in the reporting as well. And which basically explains the next point on why we need to periodically review the KPIs to ensure that they still remain relevant and aligned to the objectives. And we make adjustments as and when it's necessary based on the performance, based on the operating environment, and any other issues that might affect us achieving these KPIs. Okay. This is very quiet, but anyway, I will give you guys a chance to speak. There is an activity we'll do at the end just to ensure that we are all aligned and we understand what you're talking about. Then the next slide is on data collection and analysis, which obviously is one of my favorites because I love numbers and I love to be able to kind of decipher what numbers are telling us, what's the underlying story behind that these numbers are telling us. So obviously, first things first, we need to understand what you want to achieve from this data. What is it that you need to report on, right? So are there any specific questions that we need to answer from the quantitative data, from the numbers that we're getting? Say you run your survey for, say, 10, 15 SMMEs that are on your project. You get the numbers back. Are there any specific questions that you're looking forward to answer from this? So, sticking to the same examples, you would assume you'd want to know the revenue generated, the number of jobs created, and then you want to break down the jobs. How many women are employed? How many youth are we employing? And for youth, obviously, you'd have given your range and definition of, in terms of age, what do you mean by youth? You identify the variables that you need to be able to answer these questions, right? And then there are units of measure. So for revenue, obviously, are you going to use rands? Are you going to use dollars? For jobs, I think that's very clear because these are human beings. Obviously, if at all you're doing a survey and there are commas there, you obviously round it up, right? And then once you have your data, you need to ensure that the data itself and the sources and how you've collected the data remains valid. Just looking at the statistical requirements of, is it valid, is it reliable, are we not double reporting? If it's a survey, have you ensured that no one can answer twice? Have you put in all those safeguards? Then obviously, once you have this data, you enter it if you have a database or where you store your data. If you're going to use an Excel, where else do you save it to ensure that your data is always safe? There's a backup for your data. Is it accurate? If it's a spreadsheet, who has access to it? Who will be able to make any edits or make changes so that your data set will always remain true as per the raw data that you would have received? So this is quantitative data. These are the numbers, right? Then the second set of data that we need to look at is qualitative data. And we follow the same process, but only that now here we are dealing more with insights or observations. So you can collect qualitative data either using your focus groups, you can do case study, you can do a content analysis of existing documents, whether these are monthly reports, for example, that these SMEs are submitting to you. You just go through that so that you're able to extract any insights from that information, right? And still sticking to my original definition of systematically managing something, you also then need to have checklists to ensure that you've covered all angles, right? Um, if someone is going to do a field study or a field visit, say to the actual physical premises, say of an SME, you need to have a checklist of what is it that they're looking for. What do you intend to observe? What information do you need to come back with? Because it's one thing just to go visit, but then why are you doing that? What information are you trying to get? And obviously, still, we need to ensure that we maintain confidentiality, respect, sensitivity, etc. When we're dealing with information. Then, just like above with the quantitative data, when you collect this data, you need to store the raw data before doing anything to it, right? And even afterwards, when you then transcribe, it's always good practice to still maintain that raw set data that you haven't done anything on, because when we then move into analysis, you'll see why it's always important to have the raw set of data kept somewhere. Then the
Sorry,
analysis part.
I
Yes,
have a
sure.
question, Teresa.
Yes.
What is
Mm-hmm.
the value of data analysis for ESOs?
Okay. I think the answer then lies in the next slide here. But I think if I can just answer briefly your question. So the value of data analysis is you're able to draw information and insights from the data, because this information is valuable for you to ascertain the effectiveness of the program or project that you're implementing. And then it's also a measure of success, right? And then you're able to see that the changes um, that you anticipated, is it what's happening as you're implementing this, or do you need to stop and pause and tweak something as you're implementing? I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes. So it
Okay.
helps to sort of reflect
Mm-hmm,
where I am as an ESO.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And whether you're on track to
On
achieving
track.
your initial objectives and goals that we set up right in the beginning.
Okay. No, thank you so much. I think Raphael also has a question, and
Sure.
his question is my question is on perhaps from your perspective, how an ESO can navigate the challenges maintaining and updating quantitative data as an innovation accelerator. So
Okay.
it's about updating and storing of the quantitative data.
Okay. What I've seen in my experience, what works is that if you collect quantitative data on a regular basis, that works better because it ensures that you're getting up to date data, and data that's on a up to date and on a regular basis. And most importantly, you then need to store it on a database. I know as tech people, there's always an argument about, do you want to use cloud, SQL, but just putting it on a database so that it's online somewhere and not having too many spreadsheets. Because when you then have a huge data set now, to try and work with that data set, manipulate, clean it, and analyze it might prove to be a challenge. So I would encourage that collect data on a regular basis and then ensure that it's obviously stored somewhere on a cloud-based system, be it a database or if you're going to use any of these cloud options that are available now. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Just as a follow-up, so when you say collect frequently, what sort of
Mhm.
a guideline would you give there? Per quarter,
I would
per
say
annum?
so. For example, if you're an SO and you're dealing with a number of SMEs, for example, a data point like revenue, if on a month-on-month basis, if they're able to just share with you, say, revenue where they are at, they can give you that. Then for other indicators like data, like sorry, jobs, they can then do that on a quarterly basis. And then you can always aggregate annually, but at least so that they're giving you small data sets as they go, rather than just giving you one on a huge Excel spreadsheet. You're bound to have errors, I guess, when you're cleaning it or when you're trying to analyze it. So as a guide, monthly for stuff like for indicators like revenue, then quarterly for other indicators that are not
Thank you so
data
much.
heavy.
Thank
Okay.
you, Teresa. I think Raphael says he's good with the response. And Donna has a question. Over to you, Donna. Hi, Donna, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I was just, it's not a question, I was just trying to add on to what the presenter is just mentioned. For some of the startups that we work with, it's a little bit complicated to keep collecting data like on a monthly basis. As you realize, they all have different goals within their and objectives within their organizations. So just to go back for us in our innovation hub, usually we collect data on a quarterly basis, and that is for everything. And that is because on a monthly basis, if you tell them on a monthly basis, first of all, they will not remit because they're quite busy with their own engagements. That's one thing we noticed. Then number two, because some of them come in at different times in terms of collecting their data. So when you tell them on a monthly basis, some of them will tell you, we are still compiling, we're still, putting together our financials and all. So usually if you give them a quarterly basis is much more preferable, and it works well because then you'll get comprehensive data without really struggling so much with the businesses. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. If I can just probably also just show the question to you. So when you give them on a quarterly basis, do you give them a hard stop, a hard deadline for when the quarter ends? How much leeway do you give to them? Is Donna still there?
It is. Donna, did you hear the question? Okay, maybe we can come back to it.
We can,
later.
yeah, we can come
it's
back
a good
to
question,
it.
though. Yeah, it's a good question.
All right. Okay. Then moving on to the analysis part, right? The first thing is when you get your data, you obviously need to clean the data and aggregate. And this is very, very important. It's a critical step because
Hi, can I respond now? They've just unmuted me. Sorry, I think that the person is controlling and they've taken.
All right, you can go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So usually we place a deadline. We place a deadline to this. We put a deadline to this, and we give them, of course, a quota. And at the beginning of a quarter, we send them emails. We send them information. Trying to remind them to send in their information or their data, and then also midway we also review, and then by the end of the quarter we remind them about the deadline. Just maybe 2 weeks to the end of the quarter, we remind them of the deadline. So usually within that quarter, most of them have submitted within that quarter. At least they've been able to submit maybe within the last month or the month before. So usually, yeah, there's a deadline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Then moving on to the data cleaning, like I was explaining. So data cleaning, this involves removing duplicates, ensuring that all the fields for your data set, all of them are completed, you have all the adequate information, and then you then aggregate the information that is all the aligned data points, then put them together. Just as an example, I remember when we were doing fieldwork and then we got a huge data set on it was on jobs rather. So we needed to disaggregate this by gender, age, and then we also do women and youth, right? So we had a unique identifier that we had assigned, and in this instant, we decided to use a cell phone number as a unique identifier, that whoever would come would give us the cell phone number, and then we'll then use that to try and remove duplicates. And as we're cleaning the data, we then realized that about 25% of the data had been entered twice. So it's very critical and important that we do this data cleaning upfront, right? And then I think to the earlier question that Precious had posed, we then evaluate the impact and outcomes. So we assess the extent of changes resulting from the intervention, and we compare this against the baseline. Remember my example on the baseline. We look at what was the starting point, where are we at now? We look at effectiveness. How effective has our intervention been? And then attribution, that of all the results and the data points we're getting, can we clearly and directly attribute these to our intervention, or are there any other factors that might have influenced those results that we can attribute to this? Because remember, at the end of the day, you want to see the return on investment on whatever intervention that you'd have done with these SMEs, right? And then you can then derive whatever insights from the data that you'd have received. Then we come to the reporting the findings, right? So you obviously summarize, whether you're going to summarize and use bar graphs, whether you're going to use charts or anything, just to visualize. I'm a firm believer in visualizing some of these results, because if you give them as a narrative, as say a passage or a paragraph, you might not clearly get, someone cannot clearly pick out what's going on. So if you're going to put a bar graph, for example, for revenue for all your SMEs, then someone can quickly see that, oh, this has increased. You put one for baseline and one for the actual results, say for quarter 1, then you can see the change and the movement. Then you're also given in your report, I think it's good practice to also then to explain the methodology of how you collected your data, your key findings, your interpretations, and then given your recommendations based on your analysis of all this. Then obviously, whoever receives this report, or as you're writing this report, you also then review and reflect on, okay, what did we do well? What did we not do well? What worked in terms of interventions and what did not work? And I like the example that was given here on saying, if you ask some SMEs for data month and month, they'll tell you that they don't have capacity, or they cannot submit the data. But also, when you ask them to submit data on a quarter, it's important to then give them a cutoff date. Otherwise, you go past your reporting deadlines and you still have people not giving you the data that you need.
Sorry, Teresa, we've got
Yes.
a question on validating data. So Raphael says, there are also challenges with validating the data provided by the entrepreneurs, and these may affect the overall outcome. What is your advice on this?
So in terms of validating, yes, that's a very good one, because do we want to report data that you're not able to validate? Remember, when I'm not sure what you use, say, as evidence to corroborate a number that they would have given, right? So for example, if it's revenue, what else do you use to ensure that this is a valid set of data, that the revenue that they are reporting is indeed true?
That would be interesting. Yeah, be interesting for Raphael to respond to that. But yes. What sort of evidence do you require from your ESOs, from your startups? Sorry. You can go ahead, Raphael.
Yeah, thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So my question actually especially men, and also the revenue projections, or whatever they are collecting, because to some extent, maybe some records may be not very clear. and you need to really establish, of course, to validate that data before you process. And this proves a challenge. So I want perspective, maybe will you advise something like how we can go about?
Mhm. So you were breaking up as you were starting. I don't know whether it was me. But my question was that what sort of evidence do you ask them to submit when they give you the numbers, or do they just give you the numbers, the revenue numbers, and then you take it from there?
Thank you. So maybe to start with is on the like
Mhm.
what maybe an entrepreneur or an innovator has come up with an idea
Mhm.
that is for a startup, for example, and you need to really validate that this idea is really the way they documented. And you see, there are also things to do with the patenting of these ideas and what have you. But to some extent, you may realize that maybe some of the information provided is not really up to date, and you may need to review that. And these affect the timelines maybe for the project takeoff and such.
Mhm. I think so. Do they then give you, say, the underlying assumptions that they're basing these, say, revenue projections on? Because I think when you're then reviewing data, um, the quantitative data, for example, they're giving you their revenue projection. You then need the qualitative part for you to then make a determination on your own that do you think this makes sense? Will it suffice? And I do understand the challenge because you're saying this, it's a tech program, let's say, and they're giving you just projections, and you need to make that determination that are these assumptions valid and are these numbers valid?
Exactly.
Um, yes, I think my answer will be look at both sets of data, the quantitative, the numbers that they're given, and they should give you the assumptions. So it's just like on the financial statements when you get, say, a balance sheet, there are obviously notes attached to that. I think they should also then give you the notes or assumptions to the numbers that they've given so that it gives you more information and you can make an accurate determination whether you then accept these or not.
Yeah. And I also would like
Okay.
to add that if it's a new concept, I think market research is also important.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be some buy-in from the market with regards to the idea. It can't just be, presented at face value.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
first.
Okay. All right. Then we're moving on to our last item. I do hope we will have enough time to do our quick little exercise at the end there. So the last part on the monitoring, evaluation, and learning is the L, the learning and improvement, right? So the reason why we are collecting all this data, we want all this quantitative and qualitative data, why we have all these frameworks, why we set objectives up front, is so that we are able to draw lessons from what we are doing so that we can improve our implementation, we can improve how we're allocating resources, right? So now that you have your data, you've analyzed it, you review the key findings objectively, obviously. You look at your objectives, you look at your goals, you see where are our strengths and weaknesses, what can we improve. You identify the key themes, what worked well, what didn't, and why did it not work well, right? You share your findings with all the relevant stakeholders because you want feedback from everyone so that you understand from their vantage point what their thought process is, what they think, and what areas you then need to prioritize where you can then focus your energies on in terms of implementing the change. You can go back and then readjust your goals, right? So that these are aligned to the insights that you got from the evaluation, right? And then you develop your action points and always set timelines. to this. Remember, your program, your project has timelines. So obviously when you do your learnings also, you also see it, these timelines. And I think a key thing that I can just point out from experience is that in terms of learning, you can also set up, be it quarterly learning sessions as an ESO, so that when you look at all this data, all this information, and all the reports, as internally you can sit down and have a learning session and just follow this process of reviewing, you're identifying what key insights, what worked well, what can we improve, which areas can we prioritize, because just getting feedback and getting viewpoints from everyone within the team, I think will also be quite critical in ensuring that you still achieve your set goals and targets that you would have established upfront. Right. And once we've identified the critical areas, it's not just, we're not ticking boxes here. We actually need to implement these changes and keep track of, we have said we're going to change 1, 2, 3. We communicate this to all the relevant stakeholders. We continue to monitor and assess the impact of these changes or the lessons learned that we drew from our reports, from our data. And at the end of the quarter, again, when we sit down and receive our data set, we need to compare these results that, given the adjustment, given the changes we've made, given the implementation of the changes that we've done, we reflect, we review again, and we learn. Like I said, this is a continuous process. And also critically, you need to document these lessons learned, so that even if this program reaches closeout, on to the next one, you still have these lessons learned, and you always continuously improve how you're implementing your programs, and also how you tackle future programs. Okay. I see we probably have about 10 or so minutes. I would like us to have a little exercise here. And it's unfortunate that I can't see who's online and who's not. I would have been randomly picking names. But anyway, just to ensure that we really have probably an understanding of some of the key elements of what monitoring, evaluation, and learning entails, right? Let's do a little exercise, right? So we'll all need to contribute so that we complete all these key elements from number 1 to 7. Hopefully time will permit us to do that. So I'll start. So we have an SME or a startup, right? And then the aim here is that we want to foster firm growth within the tech sector as an ESO. That's our goal. That's our objective. That's what we want to achieve, right? So what indicators can we track? If I can give you just a little hint, the indicators that we track, the answer lies in us defining what firm growth is. So from your perspective, what is firm growth? What indicators can we check? Who would like to give it a try? Precious, I don't know if they can see hands or people typing in the chat.
No one is raising their hand, so I'm tempted to to volunteer them.
Volunteer someone. What indicators can we check? Yeah.
Raphael has raised his hand. Please go ahead, Raphael.
Thank you. So for tech innovation, maybe the first indicator that must be tracked is in terms of quantifying the market, in terms of, for example, if it's about an application, you can be able to track the number of people that have maybe subscribed to the app they are utilizing. And then also maybe the second level outcome is about whether the app is effective to their needs or whatever. So we can track with the customer feedback how the app is performing in the market.
I like these indicators. Does anyone else want to add on? Okay, so how do we collect this data? So we have two indicators here that we have. How do we collect data for these two indicators that we have? So we're going to use these two indicators right up until we get to learning.
Can you repeat the indicators?
So we have number of people subscribed to the app.
The users.
That's one.
Okay.
Yes. The users, number of users. Then we also have effectiveness of the app.
Effectiveness of the app.
I'm going to leave this one as is because if I try and edit it, I'm going to give answers to the next question.
Okay.
But anyway, how do we collect data for these two indicators?
So this is for both qualitative and quantitative.
Yes. Now you have given them answers. The first one is quantitative because it's number of people subscribed. Brilliant. Then the second one is qualitative now because it's measuring effectiveness of the app.
Raphael, you want to add?
How do we collect data for these indicators?
Yeah, of course, if there's no one to add on that, from our approach, we do kind of, we do, I don't know how to put that, but we have analytics that, of course, gives us maybe the kind of data on the subscription. Maybe we can track over a week. We can say how many people subscribed to this app over this period of time. So it shows, it actually shows on a maybe daily basis the kind of people that have adopted the app. And also on the qualitative part, the effectiveness, of course, we have the feedback forms where people indicate whether there was any challenge in utilizing this app or any areas of improvement for the app. So we use the feedback form, the questionnaire, just an online data collection form.
Oh, perfect. And they've clearly highlighted how you collect data for the two different type of data sets. For your quantitative, you're using data analytics, which is a report that you can obviously generate from your system. And then for the customer satisfaction, you're using feedback forms, a questionnaire, which also we can just summarily say that's your customer satisfaction survey. That's fine. Yeah. And establishing the baseline, I'm sure because it's a startup, if it's a startup, then ideally the baseline will then be 0, right? And then your data management, where do you store this data? Or where can we store this data? Other people can chip in also. Where can we store this type of data?
Yeah. It's a learning platform. We're all learning from each other. So
I did mention where we can store data. Yes. Okay.
There's someone who's raised their hand. Coming out as okay. Please go ahead.
This is Halalelo. Good morning, everybody. One of the ways I believe we could, store data could be through a database in terms of like a Google Drive, for example. So let's say, for example, somebody has filled out a form online, an online form. All that information can be transferred into the drive, and then it's just collated there over time.
Oh, perfect. Yes, we can use a database, cloud-based storage. That's a brilliant answer. And how frequently can we report on this? So on the number of people subscribed to the app and the effectiveness of the app. How frequently do we want to report on this?
Quarterly?
Quarterly is fine. But now that you mentioned quarterly, do you want to wait until the end of 3 months? Or is this something you want to know also on a monthly basis? Because this is something you can run off your system, a report you can run off your system to see how many people are subscribed. this is not information you're getting, I think, from your SMEs or anyone else, but then you can just sit and run a report. Do you want to wait until 3 months is up, or do you want to do it on a monthly basis?
And especially if there's a change, like a drop, and you want to do something about it. Sorry, who's na? Butoy, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say, that also depends on the programs or whatever the grants or the people who are supporting you. But normally from our side, what we do, like we have firstly, from the starting of the programs, we do some assessments. Then in the middle of the programs, we also do another kind of evaluating how far the program has been doing, and also trying to measure if there is any improvement, like when it comes to capacity building, like from the start, when we measure first, before the people enter into a program, let's say an example, it's on a program. So before they enter, you need to assess the kind of skill they had before entering in the program. And then in the middle also, you do another evaluation and see how far they have been going. And then at the end of the program also, you do, but for us, we do it after 3 months. And then from there, that's when you see, like, if someone, the knowledge he gets from trainings, did any change through his working, or maybe it's a startups, the knowledge he gained, how did he been implementing it to improve his startups. So I may say, before you start, in the middle, and at the end.
Oh, perfect. And thank you so much for your answer, because what you've then done, you've then touched on evaluation, how during implementation, you also see how you can improve. And then you touched on the learning part, that how can we improve the startups given the knowledge that we've gained from above. If there are no questions,
No, we've got
you.
more questions for you.
More
We've got more questions
yes.
to the side. Don't run away.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
No, please go ahead.
Yes, so I just wanted to find out, you mentioned when I actually mentioned quarterly, and someone did point out something very important. They mentioned that we have, how about if we do it monthly, because there are people, I mean, there are areas where, you have drop-offs, or you have areas where you have not gotten enough information, and you need to see how best you can, intervene or put in any more interventions so that you can, get to what you want, to get the results that you need. So you did not come back to give feedback on that. I just wanted to, because then the next speaker, I think, then took us into evaluation, which, you did. So I just wanted to go back onto that question on the reporting frequency. If you are to do it monthly, how does it work?
Okay. So reporting frequency, it depends on the type of indicator that you're checking. Like I said earlier, some indicators you might want to do this quarterly, that's acceptable. But for some, for example, in this activity that we're doing, where the indicator is number of people subscribed to the app, right? This is an indicator where your data source is a report. You can go into your system and just report and do an analytics on your system and see how many people have subscribed. That's why I said, do you need to wait 3 months to the end of the quarter for you to get data for an indicator such as this one? My answer will be, for an indicator such as this one, where you just run a report or run analytics on your system. You can just do this on a month-on-month basis, so that if you see that the number of subscribers has dropped or anything, you need to quickly adjust costs somewhere, you can do this. So reporting frequency for me is indicator dependent. For ones like this one, where it's a report on your system you can run, I would encourage you just to run a report on a month-on-month basis so that you can quickly make adjustments where necessary. But for some, like I explained that, for example, to try and get revenue on a month-on-month basis, the SMMEs, it might be cumbersome for them. Then for that one, you can do it on a quarterly basis. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, are there any other questions or any other comments?
There's nothing on the chat. There are no hands that are raised.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we have come to the end of our quick and very short session, but I thoroughly enjoyed engaging with you, and I do hope this was insightful and this was beneficial. Thank you so much. Over to you, Precious.
Sorry, just one comment from Eric. It says such an insightful engagement on the scientific area, especially to us from a social science background like me. I'm learning a lot. And Raphael also saying thank you so much for the insightful presentation. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, for attending this session. One thing to take away from this session is how critical data is and monitoring of data is. There's a saying that says, if you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, definitely you can't improve it. So this is essential. And we thank you so much, Teresai, for a wonderful, though brief session. I see Hussan has his hand raised. You can go ahead, Hussan, before we close. Husna Putoy. And Eric also
Did
has
I
his
raise my
hand.
hands? Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't notice that I raised my hands, but
No
I can still add on something for someone who asked a question regarding how do you know that the startups, the data they're providing are accurate, something like that. Basically, on our side, what we normally do, we do an assessment for their startup before we start onboarding them on any kind of ongoing program that we do have. First, we do have to assess their startups. So when we are doing the assessment, there are a lot of points that we need to look at, so that in the middle or at the end of the program, when we need to do an evaluations or maybe monitoring, those kind of things, we know actually that the data they provided are accurate. So I may suggest that you start assessing their startups for you to understand like how far they are, on which stage their businesses is. And then from there, you will know how to help them. And also you'll be able to see if the data they're providing to you is accurate or not. And another thing for them, like at the question also someone asked, like they have a lot of, they don't have time to fill out the form, anything that we provide them on our site for us to be able to evaluate. So they need to, we normally for us send them a consent form before they enter into any program. So like I'm entering in this program, so my part is this ABCD, so that they assign it so that we know that they are committed and also they'll be willing to provide us all the necessary information that we need.
That's a good one. And you also get your baseline data. No, that's very good. Eric, your closing comments?
What is Nanani Market?
Hi, Eric.
Hello, Madam Moderator. Thank you so much for that a particular organization. I think for me, I would want to capture well the adage or the saying you just given just shortly before about the need for this critical topic of data collection and evaluation. You say that if you cannot, I think it helps re-emphasize the need of data acquisition and analysis. You say that if you cannot, I would wish to capture it very well so that it helps me look for more information on how to capture data and analyze. If you please could repeat that adage or that saying, I think it goes a long way in validating this particular critical topic.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's by James Harrington. I've just put it on the chat. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, you can't improve it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. Thank you, Tadasai, once again. And for everyone who joined, I think that's it. We'll see you guys again on Wednesday. Remember, we have another closed door session for the ESOs on Wednesday, same time at 10 to 11.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.